mother cried at my wedding, and not in the way mothers are supposed to cry at weddings. She cried the way people cry at funerals, standing near the back in a hat she'd bought to impress people who weren't looking at her. And when my aunt put an arm around her and asked what was wrong, she said, loud enough for 3 tables to hear, she could have had anyone, and she chose him. And the him she was talking about was my husband, Daniel, who was standing 20 feet away in a suit he'd saved for 3 months to buy, smiling at me like I was the only thing in the room worth looking at. And what I want you to know before I tell you the rest of this story is that 10 years later, my mother sat at Daniel's company Christmas dinner in a restaurant he had booked for 60 people, and she did not say a single word for the entire evening because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make her look small. Good to see you here. Honestly, sit down because this one has been building for 10 years and it comes out a little differently every time I tell it. So drop a comment when something resonates. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get properly into it. My name is Victoria Hale. I'm from Guildford. I'm 36, and I married Daniel Hale when I was 26, years old after 2 years of my family, treating our relationship like a problem that would eventually solve itself if everyone waited long enough and expressed their disappointment consistently enough. Daniel grew up in a small town in Shropshire. His father worked in manufacturing. His mother was a dinner lady for 22 years. He went to the local comprehensive. He did not go to university. And he came into my life through a mutual friend at a barbecue where he fixed a broken garden chair with a piece of wire. And his bare hands and made everyone laugh for 4 hours straight. And I was completely finished before the food was even ready. My family, to explain them fairly, were not aristocracy. They were not wealthy in any significant sense, but they had the particular middle-class anxiety of people who had worked hard to position themselves a certain way and were therefore acutely sensitive to anything they perceived as a step backward. And Daniel, with his Shropshire accent and his trade background and his total indifference to their opinion of him, registered to them as exactly that, a step backward, a bad decision, something to be gently and then not so gently discouraged before it became permanent. My father said Daniel seemed like a good lad, but was I sure we wanted the same things? My aunt said I was young and there would be other options. My mother said nothing for the first 6 months and then said everything. Told me that Daniel would limit my life, that I was too bright for where this was going, that she didn't want to watch me struggle, and that she hoped I understood she was saying it out of love. Which she was. I genuinely believe that. But love can carry a remarkable amount of condescension without the person feeling it ever noticing. Daniel knew what they thought. He is not a stupid man. He reads rooms better than anyone I know, and he was never rude about it. Never complained, never asked me to choose. Just said one evening, when I apologized for something my mother had said, "Vic, I don't need them to believe in me. I need you to. The rest will sort itself out." And then he went back to the business plan he'd been working on at our kitchen table, which I noticed but did not yet fully understand. He'd been working on that plan for 8 months before we got married, a logistics and warehousing consultancy aimed at small and mid-sized manufacturers who were paying too much for third-party distribution and not getting nearly enough for the money. The kind of gap in the market that is obvious once someone points at it and invisible until they do. He knew that world from the inside, from his father, from summer jobs, from years of watching manufacturers make avoidable and expensive mistakes because nobody close to them had the operational knowledge to say so. He had the knowledge. He had the plan. What he didn't have was the confidence that the plan was worth backing. And I want to be honest here because I think honesty is the point of telling this story at all. There were moments in that first year of marriage when even I wobbled. Not about him, never about him, but about the timing, the risk. The savings we were putting into something with no guaranteed return. The conversations with my mother ringing in my ears in the small hours when the anxiety got loud. I never said any of that to Daniel, and I am glad I didn't, because what he needed in that period was not more doubt. There was plenty of that available without my contribution. What he needed was someone who kept showing up at the kitchen table and asking to see the updated figures and saying, "Okay, what's the next step?" So that's what I did, and it was the most useful thing I have ever done in my life. The consultancy launched in our 2nd year of marriage from a converted spare bedroom with a second-hand desk and a whiteboard Daniel had salvaged from a skip outside an office that was being refurbished. His first client was a small furniture manufacturer in the Midlands who'd been hemorrhaging money on a distribution contract that made no sense for their volume. And Daniel went in, spent 3 weeks learning their operation, and saved them enough in the first quarter to pay his consultancy fee 4 times over. Which is the kind of result that travels fast in a small industry where everyone knows everyone and people talk about money in hushed tones and reliable recommendations. Client 2 came from Client 1. Client 4 came from Client 2. By year 3, there were 9 retained clients, and Daniel had brought in 2 people to help him manage the workload. Both of whom were, and I say this with genuine appreciation, exceptionally good at what they did and treated the work like it mattered. Which it did, which is why they're both still there 7 years later. My family watched all of this with the particular silence of people who are revising their position without wanting to acknowledge that they had a position in the first place. My father started asking Daniel questions at family dinners, real questions, operational ones, listening to the answers. My aunt began describing him to her friends as a businessman. Just like that, no qualifiers. My mother took the longest because my mother had invested the most in her original assessment and therefore had the most to quietly walk back. But even she softened by increments, started saying his name with warmth, started talking about what he was building with something adjacent to pride. Though she never once said she'd been wrong, which I neither expected nor needed. The Christmas dinner was Daniel's idea. The company had grown to the point where he wanted to do something for the whole team and their families. 60 people in a private dining room at a restaurant in London that I will not name, but that had a waiting list and a menu that did not have prices on the customer copy. He asked me to handle the invitations because he was deep in a contract renewal that month, and when I put together the list, he said, genuinely and without any drama, "Your family should come, all of them. It's Christmas." I looked at him. He shrugged. "They're your family, Vic." I invited them. They came. My mother sat at a round table with Daniel's operations director, 2 of his longest-standing clients, and a logistics analyst who had just finished a master's degree and talked for 20 minutes about supply chain theory in a way that my mother clearly found both impressive and slightly overwhelming. And at some point during the main course, Daniel stood up and said a few words to the room, thanked the team, talked about what they'd built together, and said the only reason any of it had been possible was that he'd had someone at home who believed in the plan before there was any evidence to believe in. And he looked directly at me when he said it. And I felt my mother look at me too, and I did not look back at her. Not because I was making a point, but because I was looking at Daniel, and that was where I wanted to be looking. After dinner, my mother found me near the coat check. She was quiet for a moment, in the way she goes quiet when she is organizing something difficult. Then she said, "He's done well." I said, "He has." She said, "You always knew, didn't you?" I said, "Yes." She did not say sorry, which I had stopped expecting some years earlier, but she held my hand for a moment in the way that sometimes stands in for it, and I let her, because she is my mother, and I love her, and the grace of letting someone off the hook quietly is its own kind of power. Here is my actual opinion on the whole thing, and I am going to say it plainly. The people who told me I was marrying below my class were measuring Daniel against a set of criteria that had nothing to do with the qualities that actually build a life. Steadiness, curiosity, the willingness to sit at a kitchen table at midnight and work through a problem until it makes sense, genuine care for the people around him, the kind of integrity that makes others trust you with their real problems rather than just their polished ones. They were looking at his postcode and his accent and his dad's job title and reading those things as a ceiling, and what they missed, what they completely and expensively missed, is that the people who have the most to prove are often the ones who prove the most. Because they do not have the cushion of assumption. They cannot coast on the right background or the right connections or the right school. They have to actually build it, brick by brick, client by client, until the thing they imagined at a kitchen table becomes a room of 60 people at Christmas. Daniel never made them.